Continuing on. Bearing in mind that Canadians define themselves in parts through the job that they perform, Marx attaches the idea of alienation, and this gains traction if you view the form of work through the value of a commodity. So again, remember in the previous slide, if you're watching these in sections, that personal connection shapes how we view achievement and success. This is a good time to bear the comparison theory in mind. So, bearing in mind that Canadians define themselves through jobs they perform, you want to also think about the idea that the value of a commodity is related to the cost of production necessary to obtain it. The greater the manufacturing, the greater the labor, the more the item will cost. So you can even think about this when you think about it in terms of Canadians valuing themselves in part through jobs they perform, like the value that comes with a job. The same thing is true of the value that comes with a commodity. So for example, if you're going to purchase something, whether it's, like, let's say it's an iPhone, the value of that commodity, an iPhone 11 Pro, is evident as soon as you've seen it. And the reason that that's there is, one, because of the status associated with iPhones, but that status came from the idea that the production is actually of more value. So the materials must be better, which means that it should cost more. Also, the designers that designed it, were specialists. They did a better job than previous designers, and that item is worth its value. So let's take this into sort of another form if we want to break it down in terms of the way that Marx viewed labor theory and alienation. Also understanding that the owning class and the working class are still very pertinent here. So let's take this from the example of a car. Years ago, very specialized and knowledgeable people were responsible for the production of a car from start to finish. So one person or a small group of people are going to design and produce a single car. And then that same group of people or another group of highly specialized people would be designing and producing another car. This knowledge is factored into labor and production. Hence, we get the cost of the car. Expensive parts, expensive knowledge, put it together, expensive product. In order to increase the profits of the car, the cost of production needs to go down while the value of the product stays the same. So if you are in the owning class and you know that you are going to produce these cars and you see the cost of it to produce, you want to try to drive that cost down so you increase the profit that you take home. So you want to leave the value of the product the same. You want to leave the cost the same, but you want to drive the production down. If, for example, things become too expensive because you want to make too big a profit margin, people aren't going to buy your product, so you won't have any profits. You need to make sure that people still want to buy what you've already seen them want to buy, but drive the production of that item down. So, what do? If you have these highly specialized people that are expensive because of their knowledge, you have to think about the knowledge of the person building the car is expensive. By breaking down the assembly of the car into parts, the knowledge needed for a specific part decreases greatly. Training revolves around a small knowledge base, meaning pay for that knowledge required decreases, and the ability to produce based on assembly methods equals lowering the cost of production, but also allowing the ability for more output. Workers can then make less, and the profits of the owning class increase, expanding the wealth gap, because you just took away that need for knowledge or that payment for knowledge from the workers that weren't in the owning class. So let me go through that one more time. If you can take away the need for knowledge, you can take away the need for high pay. You also break the assembly down into smaller parts, which means that the company itself might even be able to train people for that specific part, and their knowledge base is isolated to one component. If you then have people working, instead of a small group or one person on a car, but rather hundreds of people working on hundreds of parts, you're producing hundreds of cars. Not only have you decreased the cost of production, you've also increased your ability to produce more. Now, if you're the owner, this is excellent because it means that your profit margins are increasing vastly. If you are the worker, it's a problem because it means that while you used to have the knowledge base to be paid more, now that knowledge base isn't necessary because that work can be done in parts with a lot less knowledge required. So you can pay workers less while owners are able to make more. The other massive issue Marx sees with production of value is more personal. It doesn't just go into actual profit margins, it goes into personal value. Again, bearing in mind that Canadians define themselves by what they do, what happens to the value of a person when your production value is then reduced? If we go back to the car, one person, one small group is responsible for production and they see value in their work. When you break down the parts, you alienate the worker from seeing the value of the commodity. So for example, if I make a car from start to finish, I see what my work can actually do. I see that product come to fruition and I see a value in what I've just achieved and I place that value in myself. However, if you break down the parts and you alienate the worker from the actual commodity, you no longer give them the ability to create something from start to finish. So they're part of a whole, they're not actually a whole. So for example, if I give one worker the job of car doors on an assembly line, the car door is much less impressive and worth much less on its own than the final piece. Unless somebody's gotten into an accident, they're not buying just a single car door. That piece of manufacturing doesn't carry much value. The whole car carries a lot of value. That single piece doesn't carry much. As the worker then becomes alienated from the product, they have less pride in the final piece, fail to see their value. This is further going to keep the owning class in power as they're connected to the final piece or they're responsible for it. So even the worker sees the owner as more valuable because they're the one attached to the entire product. If a single person, for example, held that knowledge and power of how to build a car from start to finish, it's also a much bigger threat to the owning class because they have the ability to not build the car that the owning class doesn't know how to build on their own. And so that worker is responsible for the owner's profits. If you take away that knowledge base or the reliance on that heavy knowledge base, you also maintain the power in the owning class because the workers need everybody to get that final product, not just one person. So they don't understand their value as the whole. They need the owner. If I can design a car from start to finish and produce it, I don't need that owner anymore. Okay, so this is Marx's idea. This translates back to the idea, and I know you're thinking bourgeoisie, proletariat. This is 250 years ago now. What's the point? Okay, but let's take a look at how that factors into today. If we look at how social structures allow us to understand how work has been organized over time and the depth of skill necessary for a person to be successful, we understand where money goes in our society today. For example, the more skilled a person is, the higher the income. Also, the more skilled, the higher the income, the greater their importance in the community, the more social status that person has, and with a higher social status or with a title, the more valuable that person is compared to the general population. So, for example, when you think about the hierarchy of jobs that you have in your brain, you might rank something like part-time work or, like service industry jobs followed by, like civil servants, followed by lawyers, by doctors, by scientists, etc. You have a tier of success or achievement in your head. And that achievement, when you can say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm a insert title of job, that gives you a certain social status. If I say, hi, my name is so-and-so, I'm a teacher, it has a different value connected to it than if I say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I am a, criminal defense lawyer, or hi, I'm so-and-so, I am a CEO of. That title difference gives you a certain social status or certain value in terms of society's standards. Past trends and alienation are still visible as well because people also feel devalued if a machine is capable of doing the job a person does. The value of the job decreases and the skill set of that person is less valued. Now take that and this is not offensively to anybody who works in this field, but take that when you think about something like Canada Post. While we are very heavily reliant on our Amazon Primes and deliveries, and we want expedited parcels, the idea of regular mail, printing things, mailing things, whether it's bills, etc., all of that's been replaced by the internet, email, online payments, even things like banking I can do on my phone without having to speak to a teller. Those things have been replaced. Things like cashiers and self-checkout. Those jobs are being replaced by machines, which devalues society's opinion of that job as a whole. If you're the worker and you know that, it also plays into your own sense of value with your job. Now, Marx believed that really there needed to be an overhaul to all of this, and that a person's entire fate was determined by their social class or position. Now, a lot of Marxist theorists that came after Marx would say that Marx had a point when it came to the owning class oppressing the working class and the way that control was exhibited or maintained. But they disagreed with Marx in other ways. Antonio Gramsci was one of them. He was a Marxist theorist who was out to challenge the idea of the ruling class. He believed that the capitalist state controlled the society, not necessarily the owners themselves, but this was done through two parts. Political society rules through force. So, first and foremost, political society, the way that laws force certain people into restricted social statuses, in terms of the way that they're able to access opportunities, but also the way that governments stimulate various businesses depending on their own political agenda. Also, civil society. And this is where we come into play because civil society rules through consent. In the public sphere, groups like unions gain concessions from the bourgeoisie and sort of think that they've won something. And we accept the idea shaped by the owning class through institutions that manufacture the hegemony, the word is hegemony, of the ruling class. Now, Gramsci versus Marx. Marx believed that your social status was fated. He believed that in order to correct the wealth gap, a massive revolution was needed. All the workers are going to overthrow the owners. Numbers were on the side of the proletariat. So if all the workers band together, you could say, nope, we're not doing this, pay us more. But through fear, workers didn't do it because they felt the need for their jobs. And if one group of workers didn't do it, then it didn't mean anything because people could be replaced very easily. That's what happens when your career isn't, or a job isn't based in knowledge. Again, owners exerting control. Gramsci, on the other hand, believed in a quiet revolution. He thought that education was key in instilling children with ideas, values, and morals to challenge the current hegemony. But wait, what's cultural hegemony? Hegemony is the idea that society is dominated by one ruling class, and the ruling class's ideas and beliefs are considered the cultural norm. A social norm is a behavior cue in society that's considered normal or common. This is used by, I should only have one B, social groups to determine what is normal and what's abnormal. So when you think about hegemony, it's the idea as it moves down the pyramid. And again, you can go back to sort of like superstructure, structure, infrastructure here, and how ideas sort of siphon down through society as to what we deem acceptable, what we deem successful, what we deem as an achievement, what we see as what we're supposed to do, and the roles that we're supposed to fill, including things that we want and need. Part 3 is coming.